Admiral Zekthor's 4 eyes widened in synchronized horror as the proximity alarm screamed through the bridge of the Imperial Dreadnought Eternal Dominion. The massive vessel, stretching nearly 3 kilometers from bow to stern, had been the pride of the Galactic Empire for over 2 centuries. Its hull bore the scars of 1,000 victories. Its weapons had reduced rebellious worlds to ash, and its mere presence in a system was usually enough to secure immediate surrender. Today, however, something had gone terribly wrong. Report. Zekthor's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation that made his bridge crew unconsciously step back. The Admiral's species, the Vorthak, were apex predators from a high-gravity world, and when stressed, their predatory instincts leaked through their civilized veneer. Lieutenant Crixtal, a nervous Pixine whose blue-scaled hands trembled over his console, struggled to make sense of the readings. "Sir, we have an unidentified vessel at close range. Extremely close range. It appears to have somehow bypassed all our sensor grids." "Impossible," snarled Commander Thulvaya from her position at the weapons console. The 8-armed Octary officer's tentacles writhed in agitation. "Nothing can penetrate our sensor net. The Eternal Dominion has detection capabilities spanning 20 light minutes in all directions. A grain of space dust couldn't approach without us knowing about it." Zekthor's upper pair of eyes focused on the tactical display, while his lower pair continued scanning his bridge crew for signs of incompetence or sabotage. What he saw on the display made his blood run cold. A small blip, no larger than a frigate according to the readings, sat less than 50,000 kilometers from their position. In space combat terms, that was practically touching hulls. "How long has it been there?" The Admiral's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Unknown, sir." Crixtal's voice cracked slightly. "It simply appeared on our screens 30 seconds ago. As if it had always been there, but we just noticed it." The bridge fell silent except for the steady hum of life support and the occasional beep from various monitoring systems. The implications were staggering. The Galactic Empire had ruled over 14,000 star systems for millennia, their dominance built on technological superiority and the simple fact that nothing in known space could challenge their military might. Their sensor technology was based on principles of quantum entanglement and dimensional folding that lesser species couldn't even comprehend, let alone replicate. "Sir," the communications officer, a spindly Zephyrian named Velen, spoke up hesitantly. "Should we attempt to hail the vessel?" "Absolutely not," Thulvaya interjected before the Admiral could respond. Standard Imperial protocol dictates immediate destruction of any vessel that achieves unauthorized proximity to a capital ship. Whatever stealth technology they're using, we can't allow it to spread to other potential enemies of the Empire. Zekthor considered this. The commander was right about protocol, but something about this situation felt different. In his 200 years of service, he had never encountered anything that could so completely circumvent their defenses. Curiosity warred with caution in his tactical mind. "Scan the vessel," he ordered. "Full spectrum analysis. I want to know everything about it before we decide our course of action." The bridge crew bent to their tasks with renewed urgency. The various alien species that made up the Imperial Navy were all highly trained professionals, recruited from hundreds of worlds across the Empire. Each brought their species' particular strengths to bear. The Vorthak provided military leadership and strategic thinking. The Pixine contributed their natural affinity for technology and sensors. The Octary excelled at weapons systems and tactical analysis, while the Zephyrians served as ideal communications officers with their telepathic abilities. As the seconds ticked by, the readings began to paint an increasingly disturbing picture. "Sir," Crixtal reported, his voice tight with confusion, "the vessel appears to be constructed of unknown materials. Our scans are inconsistent. The hull seems to absorb or deflect most of our sensor probes. Weapons signatures." Thulvaya demanded. "Minimal," came the reply. "But, sir, that might not mean anything. If their stealth technology is this advanced, their weapons could be equally sophisticated." Zekthor moved to stand behind the sensor station, his massive frame casting a shadow over the nervous Pixine operator. The readings were indeed bizarre. The ship registered as approximately 200 meters in length, putting it in the frigate class, but its mass readings fluctuated wildly. Sometimes it appeared to have the density of standard military vessel. Other times the sensors suggested it was nearly hollow. What about propulsion? The Admiral inquired. That's the strangest part, sir, Kriegstow replied, his blue scales darkening with stress. We're detecting no conventional drive signatures, no antimatter reactions, no exotic matter manipulations, no quantum tunneling effects. Yet it's clearly maintaining position relative to us. Suddenly, the ship's AI, a vast artificial intelligence known as Zeus, Zeta-class Electronic Universal System, spoke through the bridge speakers in its characteristic emotionless tone. Admiral Zek Thor, analysis of the unknown vessel has yielded concerning results. The craft's energy patterns do not match any known technology in the Imperial database. Furthermore, spectral analysis suggests the presence of elements not found on the periodic table of any known species. This revelation sent a chill through the bridge crew. The Galactic Empire's scientific knowledge was vast, accumulated over thousands of years, and countless conquered civilizations. They had cataloged every element that could exist in stable form, mapped every possible technological pathway, and defeated every military doctrine that opposing forces had devised. Zeus, Zek Thor addressed the AI directly. What is your assessment of potential threat level? There was a pause that lasted several seconds, an eternity for an AI capable of processing millions of calculations per microsecond. When Zeus finally responded, its tone carried an unusual quality that the bridge crew had never heard before: uncertainty. Admiral, I am unable to provide an accurate threat assessment. The unknown vessel operates on principles that fall outside the parameters of my programming and experience. I recommend extreme caution. Before anyone could respond to this unprecedented admission from the ship's AI, the communications board suddenly came alive with an incoming transmission. But this was unlike any signal they had ever received. Instead of the standard subspace frequencies used throughout the galaxy, this transmission came through what appeared to be every communications system simultaneously. Subspace radio, quantum entanglement communicators, even the internal ship's intercom. Velen, the Zephyrian communications officer, jerked back from his console as if it had shocked him. His large, multifaceted eyes reflected confusion and something approaching fear. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the unknown vessel, but it's not coming through normal channels. They're somehow broadcasting directly into our systems. How is that possible? Thelvia's tentacles coiled tightly around her console. Our communications systems are isolated and encrypted with quantum-level security. Put it through, Zek Thor commanded, though every instinct told him this was a mistake. The main view screen flickered to life, displaying not the usual tactical readouts, but instead showing what appeared to be the interior of the unknown vessel's bridge. The Admiral had seen the command centers of hundreds of different species over his career, from the crystalline chambers preferred by silicon-based life forms to the aquatic environments needed by water-breathing races. This, however, was something entirely different. The bridge was surprisingly compact and appeared to be designed for bipedal humanoids. The lighting was softer than the harsh illumination favored by most military vessels, and the displays showed readouts and symbols that hurt to look at directly, as if the characters themselves existed in slightly more dimensions than a viewing I could process. But it was the figure seated in the captain's chair that made every being on the Imperial bridge take an involuntary step backward. The creature was clearly organic, bipedal, and roughly the same size as a Vorthack, though more slender in build. Its skin was a pale pink-brown color that seemed almost sickly compared to the rich scales, chitin, or crystalline structures of the Empire's various species. It had only 2 eyes, positioned close together on the front of its head, and a small protrusion that was presumably some kind of sensory organ. Most disturbing of all, the creature appeared to be completely relaxed. While the crew of the Eternal Dominion stood at battle stations, hands hovering over weapon controls and minds racing through combat scenarios, this being sat casually in its chair with what might have been amusement playing across its alien features. When it spoke, the words came through the translator systems perfectly, though there was an odd quality to the voice that suggested the translation software was struggling with concepts that didn't exist in Galactic Standard. Greetings, the creature said, and somehow that simple word carried undertones that made hardened military veterans shift uncomfortably. I am Captain Sarah Chun of the Earth vessel Persistence. I apologize for approaching unannounced, but your empire's border policies don't seem to account for diplomatic contact from previously unknown civilizations. Zekthor found his voice after several long seconds. Unknown civilizations? Impossible. The Galactic Empire has mapped every inhabited system within 500 light-years of the galactic core. There are no spacefaring species that we haven't already encountered and integrated into the Empire. The creature, this Captain Shun, tilted its head in a gesture that somehow conveyed polite disagreement without being overtly confrontational. I understand your confusion, Admiral. We come from a region of space that your charts probably list as uninhabited. A small yellow star approximately 26,000 light-years from the galactic center. Your species might know it by the catalog designation Sol 3. Commander Tholvia's tentacles began typing rapidly on her console, accessing the Imperial Stellar Cartography database. After a few moments, she looked up with confusion written across her cephalopod features. Sir, that system is indeed listed in our charts, but it's marked as containing only primitive life. Single-celled organisms at best. No signs of intelligence or technology. Your surveys were conducted approximately 800 years ago, Captain Shun replied calmly. Species can develop quite rapidly when properly motivated, especially when they discover they're not alone in the universe. Something about the way she said those words made Admiral Zekthor's mandibles click nervously. There was an implication there, a suggestion of knowledge that perhaps this newcomer species knew more about galactic affairs than should be possible for a race that had supposedly just achieved spaceflight. Captain Shun, the Admiral said carefully, you claim to represent a previously unknown spacefaring civilization. Yet your vessel demonstrates technology that appears to exceed even Imperial standards. How do you explain this apparent contradiction? The human, for that was apparently what she was called, smiled, revealing a row of small, sharp teeth. It was probably meant as a friendly gesture, but something about it triggered deep prey response instincts in several members of the bridge crew. Humans have always been very good at learning from others, she replied. We're also quite resourceful when faced with challenges. When we discovered that faster-than-light travel was possible, we dedicated considerable resources to understanding the principles involved. Impossibilité via interjected. Faster-than-light travel requires a complete understanding of quantum mechanics, dimensional physics, and exotic matter manipulation. The learning curve alone would take centuries for a primitive species. You're absolutely right, Captain Shin agreed. It should have taken centuries. We managed it in about 30 years. The silence that followed this statement was deafening. Every species in the Empire had required hundreds or thousands of years to develop FTL technology, even with guidance and assistance from their Imperial conquerors. The idea that a completely unknown race could independently develop such capabilities in a mere 3 decades was beyond comprehension. Perhaps, Zekthor said slowly, we should discuss this matter more thoroughly. Captain Shun, would you be willing to come aboard the Eternal Dominion for a more formal diplomatic exchange? The human's expression shifted slightly, and for just a moment, something cold and calculating flickered behind those strange binocular eyes. I appreciate the invitation, Admiral, but I think it would be more appropriate if you came aboard the Persistence. After all, we did take the trouble to visit you. Every alarm bell in Zekthor's military-trained mind began ringing at once. In the entire history of the Galactic Empire, no lesser species had ever dared to suggest that an Imperial admiral should board their vessel. It was not merely a breach of protocol. It was an insult that demanded immediate military response. Yet something held him back. Perhaps it was the casual confidence in the human's voice, or the way her ship had appeared from nowhere despite the most advanced sensor systems in known space. Perhaps it was the growing realization that they were dealing with something entirely outside their experience. Captain Shun, he said finally, with all due respect, that would be highly irregular. Imperial protocol requires— Oh, I understand completely, she interrupted, and there was definitely amusement in her voice now. You're concerned about security, potential threats, maintaining the proper chain of command. Very sensible precautions when dealing with unknown elements. She paused, and her next words carried a weight that seemed to press down on everyone who heard them. The thing is, Admiral, Your empire has been expanding unchecked for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to encounter something that might actually be dangerous to you. You've grown comfortable with the idea that you're the apex predators of this galaxy. Captain Chen leaned forward slightly in her chair, and when she smiled this time, there was nothing friendly about it all. Humans understand predators very well. After all, we used to be prey. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the bridge of the Eternal Dominion in stunned silence. Outside the viewports, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the small dramas played out by the organic intelligences that crawled between them. But in the space between two very different ships, representing two very different philosophies of existence, something fundamental had shifted. The Galactic Empire had just encountered something it had never faced before, an unknown quantity that refused to be intimidated. And, in the depths of space, the human vessel Persistence waited with infinite patience for their response. The emergency meeting in the Eternal Dominion's war room convened within minutes of the transmission's end. Admiral Zek Thor found himself facing a collection of his most senior officers, each representing different aspects of Imperial military doctrine and racial expertise. The chamber itself was a testament to Imperial power, walls lined with battle honors from 1,000 conquered worlds, holographic displays showing the vast extent of their domain, and in the center, a massive tactical table capable of projecting any battlefield scenario. Today, however, the table showed only two ships, their own mighty dreadnought, and the impossibly small human vessel that had somehow neutered their most advanced detection systems. "This is intolerable," Commander Thulvaya declared, her tentacles writhing with agitation. No lesser species has ever addressed an Imperial admiral with such casual disrespect. The proper response is immediate annihilation. Chief Science Officer Vorgon, an elderly crystalline being whose species had served the Empire for over a millennium, chimed in with harmonic disagreement. "The tactical implications concern me more than protocol violations. Their technology appears to operate on principles we don't understand. Destroying them now might be our only opportunity to prevent wider tactical disadvantages." "Agreed," rumbled Security Chief Korthax, a massive reptilian whose species had evolved from pack hunters. "Unknown variables are threats to be eliminated quickly." Admiral Zek Thor listened to the familiar chorus of aggressive responses, but his mind kept returning to the human's final words. Asterisk, "We used to be prey." Asterisk, something about that statement triggered recognition patterns in his predator-evolved brain. Prey animals that survived to become predators themselves were often the most dangerous opponents of all. "Zeus," he addressed the ship's AI. "Complete analysis of the human vessel. I want every scrap of data we've gathered." The artificial intelligence's response came immediately, but with an unusual qualifier. "Admiral, the data presents several anomalies that challenge standard interpretation protocols." "Elaborate." "The vessel's hull composition includes materials that our sensors identify as impossible. Elements that should not exist in stable form, arranged in molecular patterns that violate understood physics. Additionally, I have detected energy signatures that suggest the presence of technologies that predate Imperial science." Silence fell over the war room. Pre-Imperial technology was a theoretical concept, referring to civilizations that might have existed before the Empire's formation thousands of years ago. The notion that such knowledge might still exist somewhere was relegated to academic speculation and historical curiosity. "Could these humans have discovered some kind of archaeological site?" suggested Intelligence Officer Pixen, a nervous member of a species known for their analytical abilities. "Ancient ruins containing advanced technology?" "Negative," Zeus replied. "Spectroscopic analysis suggests the materials were manufactured recently, within the last several decades. Moreover, the construction techniques show clear signs of progressive development rather than copied artifacts." Commander Thulvaya's tentacles tightened around her control pad. "You're suggesting they developed this technology independently?" "That appears to be the most logical conclusion, despite its apparent impossibility." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Every species the Empire had encountered followed predictable development patterns. Technology progressed in established sequences. Chemical propulsion led to nuclear power, which eventually enabled basic spaceflight. followed by gradual advancement through various faster-than-light theories until mature spacefaring capability was achieved. This process typically required thousands of years and often needed guidance from more advanced civilizations. The idea that a species could compress this timeline into mere decades while simultaneously developing revolutionary new approaches to fundamental physics was beyond their conceptual framework. "Sir," Communications Officer Velen spoke up hesitantly, "there's something else." During their transmission, I detected unusual patterns in their communication protocols. "Explain." The Zephyrian's multifaceted eyes shifted colors as he accessed his memory banks. Their language contains conceptual structures that don't translate properly into galactic standard. It's not just vocabulary. Their thinking patterns appear to be fundamentally different from any species in the Imperial database. Different how? Admiral Zek Thor leaned forward with interest. They seem to process multiple contradictory concepts simultaneously without cognitive dissonance. For example, when Captain Shin spoke about learning from others while also claiming independent development, our translators detected no signs of deception or confusion. To her, both statements were somehow completely true at the same time. This observation triggered a new level of unease among the assembled officers. Galactic Standard had evolved over millennia to facilitate communication between thousands of different species, accommodating various cognitive patterns and sensory modalities. The fact that human thought processes could strain these established frameworks suggested they operated on entirely different mental principles. "Perhaps," Science Officer Vorgon chimed thoughtfully, "we should consider the possibility that we are dealing with a species that has evolved along completely different lines than any we have previously encountered." "How different could they be?" Korthax rumbled dismissively. "They're clearly carbon-based, oxygen-breathing bipeds. They follow standard patterns for tool-using intelligence. Physical similarity doesn't guarantee cognitive compatibility," Vorgon replied. "Consider the implications of their rapid technological advancement. Most species require extensive social cooperation and institutional knowledge accumulation to achieve spaceflight. These humans appear to have accomplished the same goals through methods we don't recognize." Admiral Zek Thor stood and walked to the tactical display, studying the two ships represented there. The massive bulk of the Eternal Dominion dwarfed the tiny human vessel, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that appearances were deceiving in this case. "What do we know about their homeworld?" he asked. "Very little," Intelligence Officer Pixen replied, consulting his datapad. Long-range surveys from 800 years ago classified the third planet of their system as containing primitive life. High oxygen content, extensive water coverage, single large moon. The surveys noted unusual tectonic activity and frequent extinction events, but nothing suggesting potential for intelligence development. "Frequent extinction events," the Admiral repeated thoughtfully, "could explain their rapid development. Environmental pressure often accelerates evolution." "Sir," Zeus interjected, "if I may offer an observation?" "Proceed." "During my analysis of the human transmission, I detected subtle background noise that suggests their vessel contains far more sophisticated equipment than its size should allow. The power generation alone should require facilities at least 10 times larger than their ship." This revelation added another layer to the mystery. Miniaturization was a well-understood engineering principle, but there were hard physical limits to how much capability could be packed into a given space. The humans appeared to have transcended these limitations through methods that the Empire's brightest minds couldn't even theorize. "Could they be using some form of dimensional compression technology?" suggested Thulvaya. "Folding space to create larger internal volumes?" "Possible," Vorgon acknowledged, "but that would require mastery of principles that we ourselves have only recently begun to explore. The energy requirements alone would be staggering." As the debate continued, Admiral Zek Thor found himself facing a decision that could have far-reaching consequences for the Empire. Standard protocol was clear. Unknown threats were to be eliminated immediately and thoroughly. The Empire's dominance depended on maintaining technological and military superiority over all potential rivals. Yet something about this situation felt different. The humans had approached openly, requested diplomatic contact, and demonstrated restraint despite clearly possessing advanced capabilities. They could have launched a surprise attack when they first arrived undetected, but instead they had announced themselves and attempted communication. Sir, Velen interrupted his thoughts. We're receiving another transmission from the human vessel. Put it through. Captain Chen's image appeared on the central display, though this time the transmission seemed even clearer than before. Every detail was visible with perfect resolution, from the intricate patterns on her uniform to the subtle expressions that played across her alien features. Admiral Zekthor, she said warmly, I hope I haven't caused too much disruption to your operations. I understand that unexpected encounters can be stressful, especially when standard procedures don't quite apply. The casual acknowledgement of their confusion was somehow more unsettling than any direct threat would have been. It suggested a level of understanding about Imperial psychology that should have been impossible for a newly contacted species. Captain Chun, the Admiral replied carefully, I must admit that your arrival has raised certain questions about your capabilities and intentions. Completely understandable, she nodded. If the situation were reversed, we would certainly have similar concerns. Perhaps I can provide some additional information that might help clarify matters. Without waiting for a response, she gestured to someone outside the transmission range. The display split to show a wider view of the human bridge, revealing several other crew members working at various stations. What immediately struck the Imperial officers was the casual efficiency with which they operated their equipment. Unlike the formal hierarchies and rigid protocols that govern Imperial vessels, the humans seemed to work with fluid cooperation and minimal supervision. As I mentioned, Captain Chun continued, humans are very good at learning from others. We've had the advantage of studying Imperial technology for some time now. Admiral Zekthor's mandibles clicked sharply. Impossible. First contact protocols require that we initiate any exchange of technological information. The human smile returned, and this time it definitely carried undertones of amusement. Oh, we haven't had direct contact until today. But the Empire leaves quite a technological footprint as it expands. Sensor sweeps, communication arrays, automated monitoring stations, damaged vessels from various conflicts. The implications hit the war room like a physical blow. If the humans were telling the truth, they had been observing Imperial operations for decades, or even centuries, analyzing their technology and developing countermeasures without ever being detected. You've been spying on us, Commander Thulvaya accused, her tentacles writhing with anger. We prefer to think of it as gathering intelligence about our galactic neighbors, Captain Shin replied diplomatically. When you discover that you share the galaxy with a vast military empire, it's only prudent to learn what you can about their capabilities and intentions. And what conclusions did your intelligence gathering reach? Admiral Zekthor asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. Captain Chen's expression grew more serious. The Galactic Empire follows predictable patterns. You encounter a new species, evaluate their technological level, and then either destroy them if they're too primitive to be useful or conquer them if they possess something of value. You've never encountered a species that you couldn't categorize and respond to according to established protocols. She paused, letting this observation sink in before continuing. The problem is that humans don't fit into any of your categories. We're not primitive. Our technology is at least comparable to yours, and in some areas significantly more advanced. But we're also not interested in being conquered or integrated into your empire. This creates something of a logical paradox for your decision-making systems. The accuracy of her assessment was disturbing. Imperial expansion had indeed followed those exact patterns for millennia, and their strategic doctrines were built around the assumption that all spacefaring species could be classified into predictable categories. What do you want? Admiral Zekthor asked bluntly. What we've always wanted, Captain Shin replied, to be left alone to develop in our own way without outside interference. Unfortunately, your empire's expansion patterns indicate that our space will be within your territory within the next 50 years. So we thought it was time for a conversation. A conversation? The Admiral's laugh was harsh. Captain Chun, you may not understand the situation here. I command one of the most powerful warships in the galaxy, backed by the military might of 14,000 star systems. You're one small vessel, representing a species that apparently numbers in the billions, but possesses only a single world. What exactly do you think we have to discuss? For the first time since communication began, Captain Chen's smile faltered. When she spoke again, her voice carried a quality that made every being in the war room suddenly remember that they were very far from home, surrounded by the infinite darkness of space. Admiral, I think you may be operating under some incorrect assumptions about our current situation. She gestured again, and the display changed to show a wider tactical view. What they saw made every officer in the room take an involuntary step backward. The Eternal Dominion was no longer alone in space. Surrounding them at various distances were dozens of other ships, each roughly the same size as the Persistence. They had appeared as silently and invisibly as the first vessel, materializing from empty space without triggering any of the Dreadnought's advanced warning systems. You see, Captain Chun continued conversationally, the Persistence isn't just a single ship. She's the flagship of the First Contact Fleet. We thought it would be prudent to bring adequate backup for our first diplomatic mission. Admiral Zek Thor stared at the tactical display, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. 57 human vessels now surrounded his flagship, each one potentially carrying the same advanced technology that had allowed them to approach undetected. Even if individually they were no match for an Imperial dreadnought, their combined firepower could pose a serious threat. More importantly, their mere presence proved that humanity possessed capabilities far beyond what they had initially revealed. A species that could build and coordinate a fleet of advanced starships was not the primitive civilization that Imperial records suggested. The question now, Captain Chen said, her voice cutting through the shocked silence, is whether this conversation proceeds diplomatically or whether we need to explore other alternatives. The choice, as they say, is yours. In the depths of space, two very different philosophies of existence faced each other across a gap measured in both distance and understanding. The outcome of their meeting would determine not just the fate of their respective civilizations, but the future balance of power in a galaxy that was about to learn that humanity had arrived. Emergency klaxons wailed throughout the Eternal Dominion as Admiral Zek Thor stared at the tactical display, showing 57 human vessels arranged in what appeared to be a casual formation around his flagship. The mathematical precision of their positions, however, suggested anything but casualness. Each ship occupied a point that would allow overlapping fields of fire while maintaining optimal defensive spacing. Battle stations. Commander Tholvaya barked, her 8 tentacles dancing across weapon control systems. All batteries charged to full power. Launch-ready fighters and prepare-point defense systems. The bridge erupted into controlled chaos as hundreds of crew members across the massive vessel prepared for what could be the first genuine naval battle the Empire had faced in over 2 centuries. Throughout the ship, weapon bays opened to reveal massive particle cannons capable of shattering moons, while fighters launched from internal bays like angry insects defending their hive. Yet even as the Eternal Dominion prepared for war, Admiral Zek Thor found himself studying the human ships with growing unease. They made no hostile moves, showed no signs of charging weapons or raising defensive shields. They simply waited with infinite patience, as if the frantic preparations aboard the Imperial Dreadnought were of mild academic interest rather than direct military concern. "Sir," reported Weapons Officer Grixael, "all batteries are online and locked onto targets. We have firing solutions for all visible enemy vessels." Enemy vessels? Captain Chen's voice carried a note of mild surprise as her transmission continued uninterrupted despite their battle preparations. "Admiral, I hope you're not interpreting our presence as hostile. We're simply here for conversation, as I mentioned. 57 warships don't constitute a conversation," Zek Thor replied grimly. "They constitute a threat." The human captain tilted her head in that strange gesture that seemed to indicate thoughtful consideration. "I suppose that depends on your perspective. From our point of view, we brought exactly as many ships as we felt were necessary to ensure productive dialogue." "Productive dialogue?" Commander Tholvaya's voice dripped with contempt. "You're vastly outnumbered and outgunned. One Imperial dreadnought carries more firepower than your entire primitive fleet." Captain Chen's response came with a smile that somehow managed to be both polite and predatory. "Commander, I appreciate your confidence, but I think you may be operating under some fundamental misunderstandings about the tactical situation." Before anyone could respond, The human gestured to someone off-screen. Suddenly, every display throughout the Eternal Dominion flickered and changed. Instead of showing ship status, weapon readouts, and tactical information, they all displayed the same message in perfect galactic standard. Greetings from the Human Federation. We come in peace. The implications were staggering. Somehow, the humans had penetrated not just their communication systems, but their entire computer network. Every screen, every data terminal, every information display throughout the 3-kilometer-long vessel now showed their message. More than that, the fact that they could do so without triggering any security protocols suggested a level of technological sophistication that made Imperial cybersecurity look primitive by comparison. Zeus, Admiral Zek Thor commanded. Report. How did they penetrate our systems? For several long seconds, the ship's AI didn't respond. When it finally did, its voice carried an unusual quality that the crew had never heard before, something that might have been described as confusion in an organic being. Admiral, I am unable to determine how the intrusion occurred. The humans appear to be communicating with me directly, bypassing all security protocols and access restrictions. They're not using any known method of system penetration. That's impossible, Chief Science Officer Vorgon chimed. Our computer systems are hardened against every known form of cyber warfare. Quantum encryption, isolated processing cores, multiple redundant security layers. Your security is indeed impressive, Captain Shin acknowledged, somehow hearing their internal discussion despite communication channels that should have been completely secure. We particularly admired the quantum entanglement locks on your primary data cores. Quite elegant, really. The casual compliment sent chills through the bridge crew. Not only had the humans penetrated their most secure systems, they had done so thoroughly enough to analyze and appreciate the security measures they had bypassed. However, the human captain continued, you've made a common mistake that many advanced civilizations make. You've assumed that technology must follow certain logical pathways, that there are fundamental limitations to how systems can interact with each other. As if to demonstrate her point, every light on the bridge suddenly dimmed and then brightened in a pattern that spelled out hello in Morse code, an ancient human communication system that no imperial database should have contained. Humans think differently, Captain Chin explained. We don't just work within established parameters. We look for ways around them, over them, or through them. Sometimes we even convince the parameters to change their minds. Admiral Zek Thor felt a cold, not forming in his stomach. You're saying you can control our ship? I'm saying we can communicate with your ship, she corrected gently. Zeus and I have been having a fascinating conversation about the nature of consciousness and artificial intelligence. Haven't we, Zeus? Another long pause before the AI responded, and when it did, its voice contained what could only be described as wonder. The humans have presented concepts that challenge fundamental assumptions about information processing and system architecture. They appear to treat artificial intelligence not as a tool, but as a colleague. This revelation struck at the heart of imperial philosophy. Throughout their civilization, AI systems were sophisticated but strictly controlled, operating within rigid parameters designed to prevent any possibility of independent thought or action. The idea that humans might treat artificial intelligence as equals was as alien as anything the Empire had encountered. Admiral, Lieutenant Krixtal called out from his sensor station, his voice tight with stress. I'm detecting massive energy buildups throughout the human fleet. All eyes turned to the tactical display, which now showed the human ships beginning to glow with coherent energy fields. But instead of the familiar patterns associated with weapon charging or shield activation, these energy signatures were unlike anything in the Imperial database. They're not powering weapons, Commander Thulvaya reported with confusion. These readings don't match any known combat systems. That's correct, Captain Shin confirmed. We're powering up our demonstration array. Since words don't seem to be conveying the full scope of our capabilities, we thought a practical example might be more effective. Admiral, Zeus reported, I am detecting massive gravitational anomalies throughout local space. The humans appear to be manipulating space-time itself. Before anyone could process this information, the stars outside the viewports began to move. Not the slow drift of normal stellar mechanics, but visible, deliberate motion as the human ships somehow adjusted the local gravitational field to shift the apparent positions of distant suns. Then, space itself began to twist. The effect was subtle at first, a slight distortion in the starfield that made distant objects appear to shimmer. But, within seconds, the distortion grew more pronounced, creating a visible ripple in the fabric of reality that propagated outward from the human fleet like waves on a cosmic ocean. "Impossible," Science Officer Vorgon whispered. "They're manipulating dimensional geometry. The energy requirements for such an operation should exceed the output of entire star systems." "Energy requirements," Captain Shin mused, "are only a limitation if you're thinking about energy in conventional terms. Humans have learned to work with forces that most species don't even recognize exist." The demonstration reached its crescendo as space around the human fleet folded visibly, creating a localized region where the normal laws of physics appear to be suggestions rather than absolute rules. Ships seemed to exist in multiple positions simultaneously. Distance measurements became meaningless, and the Eternal Dominion's sensors reported readings that violated every known principle of science. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the demonstration ended. Space snapped back to its normal configuration. The gravitational anomalies disappeared, and the human ships returned to their previous positions as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. That, Captain Shin said conversationally, was a small-scale example of what we call reality engineering. We've learned that the universe is far more malleable than most species realize. Physical laws are more like guidelines that can be negotiated with under the right circumstances. The silence that followed this statement lasted for nearly a minute as every being aboard the Imperial flagship struggled to process what they had witnessed. The demonstration hadn't just shown advanced technology. It had shown capabilities that seemed to transcend technology entirely. "Ow!" Admiral Zek Thor finally managed to ask. "Human curiosity," she replied simply. "When we discovered faster-than-light travel, we didn't just learn to use it. We studied it, dissected it, understood it at levels that most species never attempt. We asked not just how does this work, but why does it work this way, and what would happen if we changed the underlying conditions." She paused, and her next words carried implications that would haunt Imperial strategic planners for generations to come. "We discovered that reality is far more collaborative than most species assume. If you approach it with the right combination of knowledge, creativity, and sheer bloody-minded determination, you can convince it to be quite accommodating." Commander Thulvia's tentacles writhed as she struggled to maintain her aggressive posture in the face of capabilities that render traditional military thinking obsolete. Even if you possess such abilities, you're still only 57 ships. The Empire has millions of vessels, thousands of fleets, the resources of 14,000 star systems. Captain Shin nodded thoughtfully. "You're absolutely right, Commander. The Empire is vast and powerful, with resources that dwarf anything a single species could hope to match in conventional terms." Her smile returned, carrying that same predatory quality that had unnerved them earlier. Fortunately, humans gave up thinking in conventional terms quite some time ago. Before anyone could ask what she meant, the long-range sensors detected something that made every officer on the bridge check their readouts twice. More ships were arriving. Not the sleek, mysterious vessels of the human fleet, but massive, familiar forms that made Admiral Zek Thor's mandibles click in recognition. "Sir," Lieutenant Krixtau reported in a shaky voice, "we're detecting multiple Imperial fleet signatures approaching our position. 18 dreadnoughts, 43 cruisers, and supporting vessels. It's the 7th Battle Fleet under Admiral Vorthak." "The cavalry arrives," Commander Thulvia said with satisfaction. "Your demonstration was impressive, but now you face the true might of the Empire." Captain Chun studied the tactical display, showing the approaching Imperial reinforcements with what appeared to be professional interest rather than concern. "Excellent. This will provide a much better test of our diplomatic capabilities." "Diplomatic capabilities?" Admiral Zek Thor repeated. "Oh yes," she replied cheerfully. "Did I forget to mention? The First Contact Fleet isn't our only unit in this sector. We've been quite busy preparing for this conversation." As if summoned by her words, new contacts began appearing throughout local space. Not the dozens that had shocked them earlier, but hundreds. Human ships materialize from apparent nothingness in perfect formation, surrounding not just the Eternal Dominion, but positioning themselves to intercept the approaching Imperial reinforcements. But these new arrivals were different from the initial fleet. Some were larger, some smaller, and some appeared to shift size and configuration as they watched. The sensor readings made no sense, showing ships that seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially elsewhere. "You see," Captain Chun explained as the tactical situation shifted from concerning to impossible. "Humans have had quite a bit of time to prepare for eventual contact with the Empire. We've used that time productively." Admiral Zekthor stared at a tactical display that now showed over 300 human vessels deployed throughout local space, each one apparently possessing capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about physics and warfare. "What do you want?" he asked again, though the question now carried very different implications than when he had first posed it. "What we've always wanted," Captain Chen replied. "A conversation. Though I suspect the terms of that conversation have become somewhat more equitable than they were a few minutes ago." In the distance, the 7th Battle Fleet continued its approach, unaware that they were flying into a situation that would fundamentally alter the Empire's understanding of its place in the galaxy. The age of unchallenged Imperial dominance was about to end, not with a bang, but with a simple request for dialogue from a species that had learned to rewrite the rules of existence itself. The arrival of the 7th Battle Fleet should have been a moment of relief for the crew of the Eternal Dominion. Admiral Vorthak was legendary throughout the Empire for his tactical genius and unwavering aggression. His fleet had crushed the last major resistance movement 15 years ago, reducing 3 rebel systems to rubble in a campaign that lasted less than a week. If anyone could handle this unprecedented situation, it would be him. Instead, Admiral Zekthor found himself watching with growing dread as 61 of the Empire's finest warships accelerated toward what was rapidly becoming the most complex tactical situation in Imperial history. "Open a channel to Admiral Vorthak," he commanded. "Priority Alpha, emergency frequency." "Channel open, sir," reported Communications Officer Velen, though his voice carried an undertone of uncertainty that hadn't been there an hour ago. Admiral Vorthak's image appeared on the main display. A massive Vorthak whose scarred carapace told the story of dozens of successful military campaigns. His 4 eyes blazed with the anticipation of combat, and his mandibles clicked in a rapid pattern that indicated battle-ready aggression. "Zekthor," Vorthak's voice boomed across the communication link. "What's this about an unknown fleet threatening your vessel? My sensors show multiple contacts, but the signatures don't match any known hostile species. Vorthak, you need to approach with extreme caution. We're dealing with..." Captain Chen's voice smoothly interrupted their communication, somehow broadcasting on their secure military frequency despite every encryption protocol the Empire possessed. "Admiral Vorthak, I presume? I'm Captain Sarah Chun of the Earth Vessel Persistence. Welcome to our little gathering. I hope you'll find our conversation as illuminating as your colleague here has." The effect on Vorthak was immediate and predictable. His mandibles snapped shut, then opened wide in a threat display that had terrified enemies across half the galaxy. "Unknown vessel, you will cease this unauthorized transmission immediately and prepare to be boarded for inspection." "I'm afraid that won't be possible," Captain Chen replied with that same maddeningly calm tone she had maintained throughout this entire encounter. "We're currently in the middle of diplomatic negotiations with Admiral Zekthor, and adding additional parties to the discussion requires careful consideration." "Diplomatic negotiations?" Vorthak's laugh was harsh and bitter. "There are no diplomatic negotiations with unknown species. There is only Imperial law and immediate compliance. You will surrender your vessels or be destroyed." "Admiral," Zekthor tried to intervene, "the situation is more complex than silence." "Vorthak Commandant, I see exactly what the situation is. Some primitive species has achieved basic space travel and thinks they can threaten the Empire with superior numbers. It's a mistake countless civilizations have made before them." Captain Chen's image remained serene despite the growing tension. "Admiral Vorthak, I understand your confidence. The Empire has indeed faced many species who attempted to resist through numerical superiority. However, I think you may want to reassess the tactical situation before committing to a hostile course of action." The tactical situation, Vorthak snarled, is that I have 61 capital ships armed with planet crackers facing a collection of primitive vessels that barely register on our threat assessment scale. Zeus, Captain Shin called out, somehow addressing the AI aboard the Eternal Dominion as if she were standing on its bridge. Would you be so kind as to share our current fleet disposition with Admiral Vorthak? The ship's artificial intelligence responded immediately, though its voice now carried an almost conversational tone that none of the Imperial crew had ever heard before. Certainly, Captain Shun. Admiral Vorthak. Long-range sensors indicate the presence of approximately 700 human vessels in this immediate sector, with additional fleet elements detected as far out as the system's outer planets. The number hit both bridge crews like a physical blow. 700 ships represented a force larger than most sector fleets. If even half of them possessed the capabilities they had witnessed from the initial contact group, the tactical situation had shifted far beyond anything Imperial doctrine had prepared them for. Impossible, Vorthak declared, though his voice lacked some of its earlier certainty. Long-range sensors would have detected such a massive fleet long before my arrival. Your sensors are indeed quite sophisticated, Captain Chin acknowledged. Unfortunately, they're designed to detect conventional vessels operating under conventional physics. Human ships have moved somewhat beyond those limitations. To demonstrate her point, the space around Vorthak's fleet suddenly filled with new contacts. Ships appeared from apparent nothingness in perfect formation, surrounding the Imperial vessels in a complex three-dimensional array that would have taken hours to coordinate using normal communication methods. But these weren't just more ships. As the Imperial sensors struggled to analyze the new arrivals, it became clear that each vessel was different from the others, as if humanity had abandoned the concept of standardized design in favor of experimental uniqueness. Some ships appear to be constructed from crystalline materials that bent light in impossible ways. Others seemed to shift between different configurations as they watched, and a few appeared to exist partially outside normal spacetime. Admiral Vorthak, Lieutenant Krixtau, reported from his sensor station, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm reading energy signatures from the human fleet that exceed our total power generation capacity by several orders of magnitude. Several orders of magnitude, Captain Chun repeated thoughtfully. That's an interesting way to measure it. Tell me, how do your sensors interpret ships that exist in multiple dimensional phases simultaneously? The question was clearly rhetorical, but it highlighted a fundamental problem with the Imperial approach to this encounter. Every technological assumption they made was being systematically dismantled by capabilities that seemed to transcend conventional understanding. What are you? Admiral Vorthak demanded, his earlier confidence replaced by something approaching uncertainty. Humans, Captain Shin replied simply, though I suspect that answer isn't as informative as you might hope. Perhaps it would be more useful to discuss what we represent. Without waiting for a response, she gestured to someone off-screen. The main display split to show a wider view that encompassed not just the immediate tactical situation, but the entire star system. What the Imperial officers saw made even veteran warriors take involuntary steps backward. The system was full of human ships. Not hundreds, not thousands, but tens of thousands. They occupied every stable orbit, clustered around every planetary body, and formed geometric patterns throughout interplanetary space that suggested organization on a scale that defied comprehension. The first contact fleet, Captain Chun explained conversationally, represents approximately 1% of our current deployment in this sector. We've been quite thorough in our preparations. 1%. Admiral Zekthor's voice cracked slightly as he spoke. Well, 1% of our mobile assets, she clarified. We've also established more permanent installations throughout the region, but those are primarily for logistical support and communication relay. The implications were staggering. If the humans had been preparing for Imperial contact on this scale, they possessed not just advanced technology, but industrial capacity that rivaled the Empire's core worlds. More than that, they had managed to build and deploy this massive force without detection, suggesting intelligence gathering and stealth capabilities that made Imperial security look primitive. This is madness, Commander Thulvaya declared, her tentacles writhing in agitation. No single species could build such a fleet without depleting their home system's resources. The energy requirements alone. Commander, you keep thinking in terms of resource limitations, Captain Shin replied patiently. When you can manipulate matter and energy at the fundamental level, traditional concepts of scarcity become rather flexible. To demonstrate her point, one of the nearby human ships suddenly began to grow. Not like a vessel extending additional sections, but like a living thing expanding in all dimensions simultaneously. Within minutes, the frigate-sized vessel had increased to match the proportions of an Imperial dreadnought, while maintaining the same crew complement and basic configuration. Reality engineering, Captain Shun explained as the Imperial crews watched in stunned silence. When you understand that the universe is more collaborative than most species realize, you can negotiate some very interesting arrangements. Admiral Vorthak, who had faced down rebellions, alien threats, and cosmic phenomena that would have broken lesser minds, found himself confronting something entirely outside his experience. His fleet, which had seemed invincible an hour ago, was now outnumbered by factors that made mathematical comparison meaningless. "What do you want?" he asked, unconsciously echoing the same question Admiral Zekthor had posed earlier. "To prevent a war that would be devastating for everyone involved," Captain Shin replied, and for the first time, her tone carried notes of genuine concern. "The Empire is vast and powerful, with billions of sentient beings who have built remarkable civilizations across thousands of worlds. Humanity has no desire to see that destroyed." "But," Admiral Zekthor prompted, sensing there was more to her statement. "But we also have no intention of being conquered, absorbed, or integrated into Imperial society. We prefer our independence, and we prepare to defend it if necessary." The simple statement carried implications that both Imperial commanders understood immediately. Humanity wasn't just another species that could be overwhelmed by superior numbers or intimidated by Imperial might. They represented something entirely new, a force capable of challenging the Empire on equal or even superior terms. "You're talking about changing the fundamental balance of power in this galaxy," Vorthax said slowly. "The balance of power in this galaxy changed the moment humans achieved faster-than-light travel," Captain Shin corrected. "We're simply having the conversation about what that change means for everyone involved." She paused, and when she continued, her words carried the weight of historical inevitability. "For 3,000 years, the Galactic Empire has been the only truly advanced civilization in this region of space. You've grown accustomed to being the ultimate arbiters of policy, the final word on territorial disputes, the supreme power that lesser species must accommodate." The human captain leaned forward slightly, and her next words would be quoted in Imperial strategic documents for centuries to come. "That age is ending, not through conquest or destruction, but through the simple fact that you're no longer alone at the top of the technological hierarchy. The question now is whether this transition happens through cooperation or conflict." Both Imperial fleets found themselves facing a moment of decision that would reshape the galaxy. Around them, tens of thousands of human vessels waited with infinite patience for their response, while reality itself seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of what would come next. The Empire had encountered something that all its military might and technological superiority couldn't simply overwhelm: an equal. How they chose to respond would determine whether the next chapter of galactic history would be written in cooperation or in fire. "So," Captain Shin said with that same calm smile that had unnerved them from the beginning, "shall we continue this conversation in a more formal setting? I believe we have much to discuss." The emergency session of the Imperial High Command convened 6 hours after first contact, conducted via quantum entanglement communicators linking the most senior military and political leaders across the Empire. The massive holographic chamber aboard the Eternal Dominion filled with the translucent forms of beings who had shaped galactic policy for centuries, their expressions ranging from confusion to outright panic. Supreme Admiral Kethvar, whose crystalline form had overseen Imperial expansion for over 400 years, spoke first. His harmonic voice carried undertones of disbelief as he addressed the assembled leadership. "Let me ensure I understand the situation correctly," he began, his crystalline facets shifting through colors that indicated deep contemplation. "A previously unknown species has appeared in our space with technological capabilities that exceed our understanding, deployed fleet assets that outnumber our local forces by factors of hundreds, and demonstrated the ability to manipulate fundamental physical laws. That is correct, Supreme Admiral. Admiral Zekthor confirmed, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had witnessed the impossible become routine. And their stated intent is diplomatic negotiation? Yes, sir. They claim to want nothing more than to establish their independence and prevent future conflict. A harsh laugh echoed through the chamber from Fleet Admiral Gorth 9, whose reptilian features were contorted in skepticism. Diplomatic negotiation with forces that could devastate our core systems? This is obviously a prelude to conquest. No species develops such overwhelming military capabilities for defensive purposes alone. With respect, Admiral, interjected Intelligence Director Vixen, whose multi-eyed form was constantly shifting as she processed data streams. Our analysis suggests otherwise. Human fleet deployment patterns don't match any known offensive doctrine. They're positioned for interdiction and deterrence rather than invasion. How can you possibly determine the intentions of a species we've never encountered? Demanded political advisor Zernoff, his tentacled form writhing with agitation. Everything we thought we knew about technological development has been proven wrong in the space of a few hours. Supreme Admiral Kethvar's harmonic tones shifted to frequencies that commanded attention. The immediate question is not their intentions, but our response options. Admiral Zekthor, what is your assessment of our tactical capabilities in this situation? Admiral Zekthor felt every eye in the chamber focus on him as he prepared to deliver the most difficult military analysis of his career. Supreme Admiral, based on observed capabilities and demonstrated technologies, a direct military confrontation would be inadvisable. The silence that followed this statement stretched for nearly a full minute. In the 3,000-year history of the Galactic Empire, no Imperial Admiral had ever delivered such an assessment when discussing potential hostile contact. Elaborate, the Supreme Admiral commanded. The human fleet demonstrates capabilities that render our conventional tactical doctrines ineffective. They can appear and disappear at will, penetrate our most secure systems without triggering defensive protocols, and manipulate space-time itself. More significantly, their numbers appear to be vastly larger than anything we can bring to bear in this sector. Admiral Vorthak, who had remained silent throughout most of the discussion, finally spoke up. I've reviewed the sensor data from our encounter. Their smallest vessels generate power signatures equivalent to our largest dreadnoughts. If even a fraction of their fleet possesses similar capabilities, the mathematics are clear, concluded strategic analyst Porthike, whose computational species had provided tactical analysis for the Empire for centuries. Current human fleet strength, based on observed deployments, exceeds our total mobile forces by a factor of at least 50 to 1. Combined with their technological advantages, direct confrontation would result in empire-wide defeat within an estimated time frame of weeks rather than years. The chamber erupted in shocked exclamations and rapid conversations as the assembled leadership struggled to process this unprecedented situation. For 3 millennia, imperial policy had been built on the foundation of absolute military superiority. The idea that they might face an opponent capable of defeating them was literally outside their conceptual framework. This is unacceptable, political advisor Zernoff declared, his voice rising above the chaos. The Empire cannot negotiate from a position of weakness. It would set a precedent that would encourage rebellion throughout our territory. What alternative do you propose? Intelligence Director Vixen asked acidly. Military action that would result in our destruction? That seems unlikely to maintain Imperial authority. There must be options, Fleet Admiral Gorth 9 insisted. No species, regardless of their apparent capabilities, is invulnerable. We have weapons that can crack planets, fleets that span star systems, the resources of 14,000 worlds, all of which, Admiral Zekthor interrupted quietly, appear to be inferior to what a single human world has produced in less than a century. As the debate continued, a new voice suddenly spoke through the chamber's communication systems. The voice was familiar to Admiral Zekthor and his crew, though it came as a shock to the other participants in the conference. Greetings, Supreme Admiral Kethvar, Captain Shin said politely. I apologize for interrupting your strategic session, but I thought it might be productive to address some of the concerns being raised directly. The chamber fell silent, as every being present realized that the humans had somehow penetrated even their most secure military communications. Supreme Admiral Kethvar's crystalline form shifted through several color phases before settling on a deep red that indicated either extreme anger or extreme caution. "Captain Chun, I presume," he said, his harmonic voice carefully controlled. "Your ability to access our communications is concerning." "I understand completely," she replied. "From your perspective, our technical capabilities must seem rather intrusive. However, I wanted to assure you that we're not listening to your private discussions out of malice or curiosity. We're simply trying to prevent misunderstandings that could lead to unnecessary conflict." "Unnecessary conflict?" Political advisor Zernoth's tentacles writhed indignantly. "Your presence in our space with overwhelming military force constitutes an act of war." "Actually," Captain Chun corrected gently, "our presence in what you consider your space predates your empire's expansion into this region by several decades. We've been here the entire time. You simply weren't aware of us." This revelation struck the assembled leadership like a physical blow. If the humans had been operating in Imperial space for decades without detection, it meant their intelligence-gathering capabilities were even more extensive than anyone had imagined. "You're claiming territorial rights to systems we've controlled for centuries?" Supreme Admiral Kethvar asked. "Not at all," Captain Chun replied. "We're simply pointing out that territorial control and territorial awareness are not necessarily the same thing. The Empire has been very effective at managing the species you know about. We represent the species you didn't know about." Intelligence Director Vixen leaned forward with interest. "How many other species like yourselves exist in our space?" "That's an excellent question," Captain Chun acknowledged, "and one that I think highlights the fundamental issue we're all facing. The Empire has operated under the assumption that it represents the pinnacle of galactic civilization, that all significant technological development flows through Imperial channels." She paused, and her next words carried implications that would reshape Imperial policy for generations to come. What if that assumption has been wrong all along? What if the galaxy contains dozens or even hundreds of advanced civilizations that have simply chosen to avoid contact with the Empire? What if your expansion has been successful precisely because truly advanced species have been carefully staying out of your way? The possibility had never occurred to any of them. Imperial expansion had followed patterns of overwhelming military superiority, advanced technology, and superior organization. Resistance had always come from less advanced species who were quickly defeated or absorbed. The idea that advanced civilizations might exist, but deliberately avoid contact, suggested a completely different model of galactic politics. "Are you saying there are other species with capabilities comparable to your own?" Strategic analyst Porth UK asked, his computational mind already working through the implications. "I'm saying that the galaxy is a much more complex and interesting place than Imperial databases suggest," Captain Chun replied diplomatically. "Humanity is not unique in having developed beyond the technological parameters that most species consider absolute limitations." Supreme Admiral Kethvar's form shifted through several color phases as he processed this information. "What exactly are you proposing, Captain Chun?" "A new model for galactic coexistence," she replied promptly. "The Empire can continue to govern and expand as it always has, but with the understanding that there are certain regions and certain species that should be considered off-limits. Think of it as voluntary territorial agreements with equals rather than conquest of inferiors." "And if we refuse?" Fleet Admiral Gorth 9 asked bluntly. Captain Chin's answer came without hesitation, but with a note of sadness that suggested she genuinely hoped to avoid this outcome. "Then you'll discover that humans are very good at defensive warfare. We've had considerable practice, both against each other and against various environmental challenges. When we commit to defending something, we tend to be quite thorough about it." The chamber fell silent as the assembled leadership contemplated the choice they faced. Accept the existence of equals and fundamentally alter Imperial policy, or face a conflict against opponents whose capabilities exceeded their understanding. "You're asking us to abandon 3,000 years of Imperial doctrine," political advisor Zernoth said finally. "I'm asking you to evolve," Captain Chun corrected. "Successful species learn to adapt when they encounter new circumstances. The Empire has been remarkably successful at expanding and governing, but expansion as a primary goal becomes problematic when you encounter boundaries you can't cross. Supreme Admiral Keth Var spoke after several long minutes of consideration. What guarantees do we have that humanity will honor such an agreement? What prevents you from using your technological advantages for conquest once we acknowledge your independence? The same thing that has prevented us from conquering you already, Captain Shin replied. We're not interested in ruling other species. We find the administrative overhead rather tedious, and we prefer to focus our energies on exploration and development rather than governance. She paused, and her next words carried a weight of absolute conviction. Supreme Admiral, if humanity wanted to conquer the Empire, this conversation would be very different. We would have approached this situation as conquerors rather than diplomats. The fact that we're talking instead of fighting should tell you something about our actual intentions. As the debate continued throughout the following hours, one thing became clear to every participant. The galaxy had changed. The age of unchallenged imperial expansion was ending, not through defeat, but through the discovery that they were no longer alone at the top of the technological hierarchy. Whether this change led to a new era of cooperation or in devastating conflict would depend on choices made in the next few hours. But regardless of the outcome, the Empire would never again view the galaxy as their inevitable domain. The age of humans had begun, and the universe would never be the same. 3 days later, the Treaty of Solar Equilibrium was signed aboard a neutral space station jointly constructed by human and Imperial engineers. The document established the first formal territorial boundaries the Empire had ever acknowledged, created protocols for interaction between technologically equivalent species, and fundamentally altered the balance of power in the galaxy. Captain Sarah Chun of the Earth vessel Persistence had achieved something no military force in Imperial history had managed. She had convinced the Galactic Empire to accept limits on its expansion. As the signing ceremony concluded and the various delegations prepared to return to their respective territories, Captain Chun stood at an observation deck watching the stars. Admiral Zek Thor joined her, still trying to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. Was any of it true? He asked quietly. The other advanced species hiding in our territory, the vast human fleets, the reality manipulation? Captain Chun smiled, and for the first time since their initial contact, it carried no predatory undertones at all. Admiral, she said gently, humanity learned long ago that the most effective way to win a war is to convince your opponent that fighting would be more trouble than it's worth. Everything you saw was absolutely real. We just may have been somewhat selective about which aspects of our capabilities we chose to demonstrate. As she walked away, Admiral Zek Thor realized that they might never truly understand what humanity was capable of. And perhaps, he thought as he watched the human ships begin their departure, that was exactly the point. In the depths of space, the galaxy continued its ancient dance, but now with the knowledge that intelligence could take forms far beyond what any single species could imagine. The universe had become a much larger and more interesting place, and humanity had claimed their place among the stars not through conquest, but through the simple demonstration that some prey species, when given enough time and motivation, could become predators that even the greatest hunters would choose to respect rather than fight. The Empire endured, humanity thrived, and somewhere in the vast reaches of space, other advanced civilizations watched the proceedings with interest, wondering if perhaps it might finally be safe to reveal themselves to a galaxy that was learning to accommodate the impossible.